fear of failure holds us back in so many things in life. And if we're honest, it really, really does. I mean, think about if I could guarantee you the next 3 things you try, you'll absolutely succeed in. I'm going to bet you'd choose some bold things. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about when you're at that low, low, low point, and many of us have been there, some of us will be there, is that it's so easy to see everything that's being taken away from you, but it's not easy to see that one really, really, really valuable gift has been given to you, and it has a short shelf life. And the gift is this. That is the one time when I guarantee you will not fear failure. You just don't care. You're already at the bottom of the barrel. What's failure going to do? Make you feel bad? You already feel miserable. So the point of it is that for a short while, you are bulletproof.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Hey, it's Srini. So one of the things that makes it possible for us to make this show is by selling sponsorships to advertisers. And one thing that would be really helpful in terms of helping us get more sponsors that are relevant to you and useful to you is that if you tell us a little bit about who you are. And you can do that by filling out this quick survey at unmistakablecreative.com/podsurvey. The questions are about you, demographic information, and information that's helpful to the team that sells ads for the show. And if you're someone who wants to buy ads, you should definitely get in touch. It'll only take a few minutes, and it's an easy way for you to help the show. Again, that's unmistakablecreative.com/podsurvey, and there will also be a link in descriptions of most recent episodes if you're listening to an older episode. Thanks, and stay tuned for the rest of the episode. David, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I found out about your book, The Altitude Journals, by way of your publicist. And when she told me that you were, a person who had climbed Everest, I thought, yes, I want to talk to this person. There's probably a lot to learn. So I want to start with a question that I think is very informative, just based on some of what I know. And that is, what is one of the most important lessons that you learned from one or both of your parents that have influenced and shaped who you've become and what you ended up doing with your life?
I would go to a lesson that I learned from my mom. She always told us we were special, and to be quite honest, we were not. We were just poor. But you got to hang your hat on something, and she was always making the case why we were special. We would get food stamps, which of course are printed in multicolored script. But she would point out how special our money was versus the normal green money and this sort of thing. So you get the idea. And the funny thing is if you brainwash a kid young enough, he actually internalizes and believes some of the stuff a parent says to him. And I think, even when I was old enough to recognize the sort of the kinder spin my mother was putting on our difficult circumstances, the message that we were special stayed with me somehow. And that can make a difference in the context of the choices a person makes in their life. If in the back of your mind there's a little voice saying, "Yeah, but you're special," I think it gives you license to explore ideas that you might not otherwise. And of course, the truth is we're all special, and I think it's just so important that we find the space to see that and know it and believe it and understand it as a basic truth that feeds the course of our lives.
Yeah. So there's one other thing that you said in the book. There are two things I wonder. You said your father disappeared and he picked up his new family, the family he married into shortly after he divorced your mother in 1968, and there was no forwarding address and likewise no child support. What I wonder is, having this mother who told you that you were special and having this father who had disappeared from your life in childhood, how has that influenced your own experiences as a parent? Because I know you have two sons. Like, how has that shaped and influenced you as a parent?
Well, it made me very conscious of the father that I would be. And I think it's a standard thing. Every son would like to do better than his father did, but in my case, the bar was so low that
Yeah.
it just wasn't difficult. And at some point, I realized, no. Let's start with a blank piece of paper. Don't be a father relative to another father. What is the image of the father you would draw with a blank piece of paper, and how can you shape your choices and your guidance for your sons, and set examples that are healthy and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as far as examples, I mean, what are the kinds of things that you've encouraged your children to do as a parent? Because you're kind of an unconventional father. I don't think most of us, deal with a father who decides that, you know what, after a career on Wall Street, I'm going to go climb Everest.
Yeah. Well, I've always encouraged my sons, first of all, to be open thinkers, to just not accept truths that are handed to them, to ask questions, to prod, to explore, to make up their own mind. I want them to be free thinkers. And I have always tried to expose them to other cultures, other places. I would like them to be more global citizens than American citizens. Not that there's anything wrong with being an American citizen, but I think the more you experience of the rest of the world, the greater appreciation you have, not just for the rest of the world, but for the world you live in. And we live in a marvelous world in America. We are so fortunate. I've been to places where the water they drink is not as clean as the water we crap in. And those sort of lessons really stick to you and create a much greater appreciation for what we have. And I think that is the basis of gratitude for all good things returning, as well as what generosity you can share with others.
Mm-hmm. So, I think that, like I was telling you before we hit record here, I think the things that really stood out to me more than the climbs themselves were sort of the life lessons that came from each one, and sort of the things that prompted this whole thing. But you talk about divorce and you say it's just the final destination on a long road trip of unbelieving. It's route crossing rivers and mountain ranges, zigzagging randomly and pausing for occasional breakdowns. You litter each rest stop with the wrappers of what you once held as the truth: love is forever. And then shortly after that, you say the human tendency to extrapolate recent experience into the future racks up an awesome toll of suffering to come. And you were talking about this, from the context of climbing, but I think that was about a lot more than climbing. How did you, arrive at this conclusion? And how do people actually resist that tendency to extrapolate recent experience into the future?
Yeah, so that tendency in psychology has a name. It's called recency bias, and this is something that's hardwired into most of us, and frankly served us quite well throughout most of evolution. The notion that whatever has happened recently is going to keep happening in the very near future and foreseeable thereon. If the last 3 times somebody who went to the water hole for water was eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, you would say, aha, this is maybe not a good idea. We'll go to a different water hole. It's that kind of a thing. But there are problems in modern society when we let recency bias impact the decisions we make. I make a living on Wall Street, and something I'm constantly fighting for the benefit of clients is their own recency bias. If the market's gone down 30%, nobody wants to buy stocks because recency bias says it's going to go down more. Well, it might or it might not, but things are 30% off, and you were perfectly willing to buy them before this happened. So we should actually feel pretty good about this. And for buying for the long haul, this is a pretty good time to go pick up some great values, which is what I've been doing for the last several weeks. But it extends into a lot of other things. And the example I use in the book is mountain climbing, and this notion that if the only reason a climber is on the expedition is to reach the summit, it's very unlikely they're going to get there. And I've seen it so many times because the total amount of sacrifice and suffering required to get to the summit easily exceeds any glow you're going to feel when you're standing there. And at some point, we realize this. So there's got to be something else that's driving you, and we can talk about what that is if you like. But but the point of it being is that if you're having a bad day as a climber, and everybody does sooner or later, and the only reason you are there is to get to the summit, and you make the mistake of looking up at the summit, and it's still 8,000 feet above you, the impossibility of it will crush you. and you won't have what it takes to suffer through another day in thin oxygen, and you're done. And so that's recency bias. You've been having a tough time, and all you can really do is extrapolate that moving forward, which probably is not correct in that case. Tomorrow's always a better day, but it's part of the mental game when it comes to especially altitude climbing, where I've seen so many climbers who physically were very, very capable of reaching the summit, but mentally they just did not manage that game adequately.
Yeah, so that makes me wonder, what role, you mentioned sort of lack of oxygen in thin air, like what role does the mental play in the physical, particularly in that environment? I mean, I think that there's no question that our physical bodies and our mental thought process are incredibly linked. But in this case, your mind can actually get in the way of your body. Whereas I think in our day-to-day lives, we tend to actually, get a lot of value from our body because it actually helps the mind in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Very true. A good workout leaves you feeling ebullient mentally. Yeah. And we've seen this, and positive thoughts make you more capable of doing challenging physical things. So the two are quite linked. And I don't think that link breaks down in high altitude, but the volume gets turned down on each of those two voices. They don't hear each other quite as well. Yeah. By the time a climber goes above 19,000 feet, the oxygen that's available is so thin that your body starts to shut down. By any medical definition, you are dying. And the whole idea with high altitude climbing is to manage the process of dying in a way where you buy enough time to get up and down before that concludes. And so your body clearly is being pushed. Your mind is being pushed. By the time I got up to 23,000 feet, I couldn't do simple math, adding and subtracting. You're missing 50% of the oxygen that we breathe at sea level, and believe me, you feel that. And so somehow you need enough of each of those things left over to make that effort to get to the summit, and that inevitably is the big moment in any major high altitude climb, is when you're at high camp and you're saying, have I got enough left of these things to actually pull this off?
Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to the climbs because, like I said, I think the lessons from them were so profound. But before we do that, talking about how you go from being this kid who grows up in poverty to, a career on Wall Street, to deciding that you're going to be one of these 65 people that have survived this, attempt to climb Everest.
Yeah. So the 65 people, that wasn't just Everest. That was for the 7 summits.
Right.
So as you know, having just finished the book yourself, I climbed the high point of each continent, and that's what's known as the 7 summits. So I was the 65th American to survive that quest. So Your question, how do you go from being a kid in poverty? The short answer is education. Yeah. We didn't have much, but with thanks to my mother, we had an understanding of the importance of education and how that was our ticket to a better life moving forward. And so she would constantly be reading and reinforcing the notion that reading is a good thing and encourage us to read. We'd talk about what we were reading. She would ask us about school. We would tell her what we were doing. Education was a topic in our household. And I think that choice on her part validated how we were spending our days in school, and we in turn validated those days. And so that was That was important. I wasn't a straight A student, nothing like that, but I mean, I did okay. I did good enough to get into the University of Washington in their business school. And then later I took additional studies at Wharton and at Stanford. And along the way, I started a career with a major Wall Street firm. And I was with that firm for 21 years. And then I made a change here about 11 years ago and went to a different major Wall Street firm. So there's kind of the thumbnail sketch.
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason I asked that in particular is I think that to go from sort of poverty to Wall Street is like the ultimate contrast in your perception of money. And I wonder how your view on money and wealth has changed as a byproduct of that experience.
Well, I probably view money differently than most of the people on Wall Street. I view money as simply the tangible viability of your hopes and dreams. Everybody's got hopes and dreams. Money will make a lot of those more likely than others. And so when we understand we're dealing with people's hopes and dreams, it's a different deal than, trying to have more money than the guy down the block. And that's how I view it. And my clients understand that because we're constantly talking about their hopes and dreams, and we're planning for them. I'm a certified financial planner. And so we plan, we measure, we mark, we keep moving on, and we're marching towards accomplishing those things. And the money is just the viable means for accomplishing those goals.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that you actually said was that having come of age in the culture of Wall Street, I had speakers and coaches preach this gospel of linear thinking for years on end. Pick a goal, never take your eyes off of it, and damn whatever gets in the way. I strongly embraced this philosophy, but the outcome of Denali strongly challenged this notion. Since that time, I'd begun to wonder if conventional wisdom about achieving goals had been all wrong. And that is such an interesting contrast to people who go and do the work that you do. I know this because I have, friends who I went to college with who literally followed the most linear path. Like the path to working as an investment banker is fairly linear. It's like go to the best damn school you can get into, then get your job at Goldman Sachs or wherever as an analyst. I mean, it's as linear as it gets. And yet I think that as somebody who has built a creative career, I know for a fact that life in general is not linear. So I wonder, based on this experience of questioning conventional wisdom. I know you said that, you have your, boys question conventional norms. Like how has it impacted the career advice you've given them to have seen this experience?
Well, this won't sound terribly unique, but I've always encouraged them to follow their interests. When my youngest son finished college, and a lot of people would go to work somewhere, he said he wanted some time to just think. And I said, well, why don't you pack your backpack and buy an airline ticket and go somewhere? So he did. He did the same thing after high school, by the way. He sold his car, and it wasn't much of a car, but it bought an airline ticket. And he showed up without any friends, any plans in Paris, and figured out how to stay in youth hostels and buy train tickets. And you meet other people doing the same thing. And he spent the entire summer just knocking around Europe and learning about himself and learning about life. My other son is an architect, and all through childhood, architecture is what interested him. Where other kids are playing video games, I bought him a CAD/CAM program, and he would design castles and buildings and all kinds of stuff like that. And by the time he was done with high school, he had this whole portfolio of architectural work he did, and it got him into Illinois Technical Institute. And for their architecture programs, that's what he does. But I encourage them to listen to what they feel, life is saying to them, which sounds about as squishy and intangible as any piece of advice. But I strongly believe in it, and I try and teach them how to do that listening.
No. So I think that what's funny is I actually don't mind that it's an intangible piece of advice, because I like offering people a compass more than a map, because I think everybody will end up with different results no matter what advice they get.
Yeah.
And the thing that I wonder, you talk about listening to what your life is telling you. And I think that is one of those things that a lot of us tend to lose with age. And it's one of those things where you wake up one day like yourself and say, okay, I'm at the low point of my life, and I'm going to climb the highest summit of the, like, why is it that it takes something like reaching this low point in your life? And can you give us, for the sake of our listeners who haven't read your book, give us context about what this low point was?
Sure. First, to answer your question, why it takes something like that is that I think that the one word answer is comfort. As we move forward in life, in our career, in our circumstance, we become increasingly comfortable. I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's actually pretty nice. But the problem is comfort's the essential enemy of all growth. No growth occurs within comfort. If you want to grow, you're going to have to put yourself in an uncomfortable circumstance. And that's simply all there is to it. So in my own case, life brought that to me. And my circumstance involved my only brother died. And shortly after that, my marriage of 17 years came to an end. And all this coincided with a market crash, and my career was very much in doubt. And on top of that, I was living in my sister's guest room, which is not where you expect to be at age 44, and suffering from chronic depression. And so it was indeed a moment where I found myself in the bottom of the barrel looking up. And so comfort was not a problem for me there. But the thing is fear of failure holds us back in so many things in life. And if we're honest, it really, really does. I mean, think about, if I could guarantee you the next 3 things you try, you'll absolutely succeed in, I'm going to bet you would choose some bold things. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about when you're at that low, low, low point, and many of us have been there, some of us will be there, is that it's so easy to see everything that's being taken away from you, but it's not easy to see that one really, really, really valuable gift has been given to you, and it has a short shelf life. And the gift is this: that is the one time when I guarantee you will not fear failure. You just don't care. You're already at the bottom of the barrel. What's failure going to do? Make you feel bad? You already feel miserable. So the point of it is that for a short while, you are bulletproof. Mm-hmm. You absolutely, because, if it works out, hey, that's great. If it doesn't, it can't hurt me. I mean, I'm already in a low place, right? Yeah. But the problem is I say it's got a short shelf life because life will get better. Life always gets better. And for anyone who's in a low spot right now, I want to promise them life will get better. Now, there's things we can do to make it get better quicker and so forth, but it will get better. When it does, we will return to our normal tendencies of wanting comfort and fearing failure. And so for a short while you're bulletproof, make a bold choice. I don't mean a reckless choice, but I mean a bold choice. And take your shot at something. I think it could hold, it could be the spark that lights the torch that leads you out of the darkness.
Yeah. Well, I love that, because I think that, it's one of those things where I said, you hit rock bottom, you've got nowhere to go but up, and I mean, I've experienced this firsthand in my own life, like graduated business school with no job, buried in debt. And I realized, I was like, wow, if I hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have started any of the things that I had. Like, and the funny thing is about these things that we only recognize the value of them in retrospect. In the moment, you're like, this is the worst damn thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like nobody is saying, I feel so lucky in that moment. Yeah.
So of all the things that you could decide to do, in your rock bottom, what in the world made you choose the 7 summits? Because there are a number of things that you could do here. You could go start a company, you could go learn how to surf, but you decided on something that is probably one of the most dangerous things a human being could do. that literally comes with the downside of death, which is hilarious because you said bold choices instead of reckless ones. This is kind of a combination of both.
Yeah, that's me doing kind of a do as I say, not as I do thing. But so what happened was on my birthday, a package arrived. It was a birthday present from my little sister and her husband up in Anchorage, Alaska. And I opened it up and poured out the contents, and it was a couple of climbing poles, kind of like trekking poles. And there was a note that said, "Happy birthday, super climber." And I thought, gee, what's this all about? So I called him up, and he says, "Look, we're planning an attempt on Mount McKinley in 8 months. Now officially renamed Denali, but that's a high point in North America. I did not know that at the time. I thought, okay, it's a mountain. But he says, and we'd like you to be on the team. And he says, I think you need something like this right about now. And I told him, I said, well, look, I'm not a mountain climber, so that sounds like a pretty bad fit to me. And last time I checked, people die every spring up there. So I'll pass, but thanks. And he said, well, think about it. You got some time. And so he would call me back every once in a while and kind of prod me some more. And I'd say, well, I don't know anything about climbing. He said, we got a team full of veterans. They'll teach you things. They'll look out for you. It'll be okay. And then somewhere in there, that notion, that gift came to me that I really didn't have much to lose. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll go. And I went to the local bookstore, bought a couple books on climbing, including one on climbing Denali, and was horrified by what I'd committed to. But that gave me a wake-up call, and I knew I was going to have to take this seriously, train hard, learn hard, do as much as I could to prepare. I hired a personal trainer, and man, when I arrived in Alaska, I was in the best shape of my life, no question.
Yeah. Tell me about the training, because the closest thing to this that I've ever done in terms of training was a friend, invited me to hike Half Dome with him, and he actually questioned, my athletic ability. So, I played basketball every day. I was in the best shape of my life. The second time I did it, I made the stupid mistake, which I'm sure you'll be like, yeah, that's, you're an idiot for doing this, of doing it with a hangover. Worst idea ever to climb Half Dome with a hangover. Because I remember my buddy called. And he, this was, we're driving up Friday night. This was Thursday. And he shows up at 2:00 in the afternoon in San Francisco. He's like, you're out all night partying, weren't you? I was like, how'd you know? He's like, because you butt dialed me, you pocket dialed me while I was boarding my flight in New York, which is, dude, like, I really don't think you should come on this. And it was the most miserable experience. I took the wrong way down with nothing but switchbacks, but and that was the end of it for me. I was like, you know what? All this walking around looking at rocks is for white people, not Indian people. This is my ongoing joke with my roommates. I was like, you don't see brown people in Patagonia ads. There's a reason for that. But all joking aside, tell me what the training for this is actually like. Like, what goes into this? Because I mean, like each one of these seems, from reading the book, it seems like they get progressively more and more difficult.
Well, they do. And the training really depends on the mountain and what it will demand. On some mountains, you're carrying heavy loads. And so you're going to need good core strength. You're going to need to beef up your back, your shoulders, as well as having super strong legs. Some mountains like a Denali or like Vincent Massif down in Antarctica, you're not only carrying heavy loads, but you're also dragging a sled full of heavy stuff. So you've got to train for that. And I would pull a tire around my neighborhood while wearing my pack. And people, would stop and ask what I was doing. But after a number of mountains, they just understood it had something to do with the mountain. They would stop and say, okay, what are you climbing now? And so then, you go through one of those where you're building, and then you're staring down the barrel of Kilimanjaro, where you're not going to carry any weight aside from your lunch and another layer of clothes, because you're required to hire so many porters to get a climbing permit there. So you're really not carrying anything, and you don't want all that bulk muscle above the waist, which will serve no purpose, but is going to have to be oxygenated in an environment where there's very little oxygen. So now you got to get rid of all that mass. And so you find yourself remaking your body over and over again, tailored specifically for the climb you're aiming at.
Hmm. So, one thing I wonder is, this is something I know you kind of allude to this, throughout the book, in terms of sort of, having these conversations each time you go. And there was one quote, but I want to come to it at the very end. Every time you go, like, I know that you ended up, remarrying and meeting somebody else after, your divorce. But each time you go on one of these, those trips, like one of these climbs, the possibility that you won't come back is there. I remember I had a friend named Maria Brophy, whose husband is a big wave surfer. And it's kind of the same thing. Like she said, every single time he goes, no matter how experienced he is, this is like 75-foot surf. Like, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is that conversation like with the people that you love most each time you do this?
Well, it's different depending on the person, obviously. So like my sons, they didn't want to talk about that. And just given everything they were going through, with life after the divorce and that sort of stuff, I didn't feel I should push the point and make their life still less comfortable. So we kind of left it alone. I wrote letters to each of them that were kept with my will in case I didn't come back. So, that I could share sort of those last fatherly words. But that was as far as we went with that. Whereas, my mom fought it at first. She would call me all the time and send me newspaper articles and whatever she could to dissuade me from doing it. And at some point she realized that nothing was going to work. That I was following what I believed to be a calling that life was issuing to me. And I simply was not going to deviate from that regardless. And then she kind of got on board, which was cool. And she would follow my blog posts and she would ask really insightful questions before and after climbs. And that got a little bit better. That was good. But she always knew when I was pushing for a summit somewhere, and she would stay up all night long, just kind of praying and hoping and that sort of thing. It was really sweet that way. As far as Lynn, my partner, I had already climbed Denali when she met me. So she never knew me as a non-climber. And so because of that, it kind of became something you just have to accept if you're going to be with this person. Yeah. That doesn't make it easier, though. And we would have talks, and there would inevitably be some moment shortly before I left on a climb where she would break down and have to kind of get it out. And I would sit with her and try and give her the honest appraisal of the risks and how we'll manage them, while not denying that there are some things that are objective. You cannot manage them. So that was the kind of conversations I had.
I can relate. I mean, nowhere near as, crazy, but like anytime, there's an article about a surfer who drowns or something terrible happening or a person getting bit by a shark somehow, my parents send me a message about it. I'm like, it's much more likely to get hit by a car. So I'm not going to not surf because somebody got bit by a shark.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think we necessarily do these things because they're dangerous. I think surfers surf because they love surfing, not because there's the thrill that you might get bit by a shark. Right. But look, anything that's exciting probably has an element of danger to it. It's the two they go hand in hand. It's what I talk about in the book. With the difference between the man-made world and nature's world. In the man-made world, everything is designed so that we can experience beauty without any personal risk, right? There are pathways and guardrails and rules and laws and all this sort of stuff, and that's cool, all right? But in nature, it doesn't work that way. The reward is always commensurate with the risk taken. And one of the aha moments for me was when I realized that love is not of the man-made world; it's of nature. And the problem is I was trying to experience love in my new relationship under man-made rules where you can experience beauty, and love is a form of beauty, without personal risk, right? So I was still kind of protecting myself, and the relationship was struggling. Once I realized that it was of the natural world, that I would never truly know love until I risked myself completely, then everything changed.
Mm. So you've had to have seen people die in this process, right?
Yeah.
And have you ever had to come back and tell somebody's loved ones about somebody dying on one of your climbs? And if so, how do you communicate that?
No, I have not. I've not
Uh-huh.
had to do that, which I'm thankful for. Yeah. There have been some deaths. I don't talk much about that in the book, and that was a conscious choice,
Yeah.
mainly because I feel like people get it. Right, there have been enough books written about the death and the suffering and the this and the that. There's really nothing left to be said on that score. I felt there was a much more important story to be told, and I wanted to stick with that. So there's a couple times in there, we lost a teammate on Everest and so forth, and I do give that some word count, but by and large, I'm not interested in stressing the ever-present dangers
Yeah.
of the climb.
Well, I mean, so these are things that I'm asking out of morbid curiosity myself. Like, what's the most afraid you ever remember being in the seven summits?
Yeah. Well, that would have been on Everest. I was climbing the Lhotse face. So when you climb Everest, you're actually climbing a lot of other things, working your way up to the part of Everest where you'll start. You don't just start off at the foot of Everest. And so, sort of the last bootstrap, if you will, is Mount Lhotse, which is sort of shoulder to shoulder with Everest. And because that south side of Everest is essentially unclimbable, you climb Lhotse instead, and then you traverse over to Everest near the south summit. And from there, you're climbing Everest, which is the last leg of the journey, really. But up Lhotse, it's about 3,000 vertical feet of gain, and it's very nearly vertical ice. And so it's difficult climbing. It's very demanding. And it's also quite high. It's 23,000 feet. So I was climbing up that, making good time. I'm pretty brisk pace when I climb. And we got to a tiny ledge and had stopped there, myself and my Sherpa Mingma, and we were going to take some hydration in. And I started getting dizzy. I started to black out. And instinctively, I grabbed an ice screw and drove it in and clipped into it. And I thought, oh no, is this really how it ends? Because it was the week before in almost the exact same place, same symptoms, where our teammate had died. And I thought, wow, this is where it ends. I don't know what's going on, but I'm in serious trouble here. And that was my most frightened moment.
Hmm. So I don't know I don't remember if this was from this exact moment, but this actually stood out to me. You said, the taunting collections of frustrations and hurts that had kept me down for years, my father's abandonment, my childhood in poverty, my brother's death, and the failure of my marriage. They kept coming one after another, a lifetime of demons intent on keeping me down, but I kept going. I kept stomping and slashing at the mountain, moving higher with each fight. How do people find that within themselves in, dealing with their current life circumstances?
Great question. Well, first, I think it's important to understand it is within themselves. It is definitely there. Finding it, I don't know. I suppose everybody has a different path to finding it, but I think when we're pushed to our limits, it comes out and it says, "Okay, enough of this shit," and it stands up for you. That's the moment I was describing that part of the book. That was on Denali. Going into Denali, I was basically just a really angry, toxic human being. And I didn't even know everything I was angry about, but I was angry. And the problem with anger is it's really just sadness pushed through the wrong conduit. And so until we can move the anger away, we can't see the actual thing we're sad about. And that was one of the big revelations for me about my climb on Denali was I got to that point where, when you've worked so hard and suffered so much, all the BS gets stripped away. There's no room for the false narratives that you used to protect yourself. None of that works anymore. And all that's left is whatever your basic truth is, and you've got to stand in that truth. And I eventually came to that moment and recognized the name by which each of those hurts would be called. And that was an important step for me. And coming back from Denali, I realized none of my problems had been solved, but at least I understood what they were now. And I could develop a means of addressing them.
Yeah. So one thing that you said, this really struck me in particular because I thought of it. I said, wow, that's kind of like the way a surfer would describe waves. You said, we like to speak of mountains as though they're people with intent, judgment, and mercy. We like to imagine our virtue as being part of the mix, but mountains don't give a shit. They'll kill you the same as anyone else, regardless of your faith or fitness, experience, or effort. So the thing that I always wonder, I feel like as a surfer, I have brought so much of what I've learned from surfing into the way I live my day-to-day life. Even as a snowboarder, I mean, now I'm living in Colorado, but still, it had a profound impact. And I wonder, in your experience, like what are the lessons from that you have, brought into your day-to-day life?
So the physical challenge, I think, most typically is associated with a sense of achievement, a sense of confidence, a sense of believing in oneself more, and all that is quite valid. But if we talk about something that's more than just a physical challenge, something that's really going to tear it all down, and this is not a unique idea on my part. I mean, Native Americans have vision quests, which are designed around the same principle, to go off by yourself in the woods without any food or water, and they have these, what some might call hallucination. They would say they're visited by a spirit. Most cultures have their own version of this. I think they all are getting at the same thing. And that is just tearing down all of the nonsense that's piled up on top of those basic truths so that we can see them. And when you do something that's really physically difficult, and afterwards, you find yourself lying there just glad to be breathing air. It'll be a while before you realize what it was you were so pissed off about yesterday. And that means in that period of time, you might also realize what it is you're most grateful for today.
Yeah. Wow. So there's one thing I think the very end of the book, this is probably one of my other favorite quotes from the book. You said, from the moment a climber wages they can stand atop Everest, they're required to make certain payments to keep that bet alive. They're psychological payments taking the form of mental fatigue, the doubts of third parties, and the painful 2 months of absence of loved ones. But the final payment a climber must lay on the table is their life. And when I finished reading that, I thought to myself, like, why the hell does anybody want to do this? Like, why do people do this? What is the reason behind this?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't make any damn sense. So you probably noted there were a number of times in the book where I asked that very question of climbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they can't answer it.
Yeah.
It just kind of becomes sand passing through their fingers. And my whole hope when writing the book is I would at least be able to answer it for me. why I did it. And that doesn't mean my answer looks anything like anybody else's, and I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. But as I've come to understand the psyche of climbers more and more and more, I've come to realize that they not only don't know exactly why they're doing it, but they like things that way. They don't want to know. They appreciate that life should have some mystery, and it should be enough that something just gives you joy.
Wow. Well, this has been really, really eye-opening. I've really enjoyed talking to you. So I have one final question, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Well, I would describe it as a barbell's impression. And I put it that way to create kind of a visual accompaniment. When somebody or something is unmistakable, first of all, it hits you right away. It's like dragging a needle across a record. It's like, whoa, this is not the regular thing here. And you have that experience and move on. And after some time goes by, you find yourself going back and reflecting on it. And it stays with you in your mind and your thinking. And I think that's our subconscious just trying to sort it all out and glean the essence of greatness or unmistakability.
Amazing. Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your insights and wisdom with our listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, the book, and everything else that you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. davidmauro.com. And that's my webpage. And I post some stuff there and a map of where I've been, where I'm going with my talks. I partnered up with REI, the equipment company, and I've spoken, I think, 48 different stores at this point. So, and I've got about 90 more to go. So I'll be around. But there's that. I think it's more fun actually to follow on the book's Facebook page, the Altitude Journals, because I post a lot more there. Short clips, videos. Recently, I shared a sub story that hit the cutting room floor during editing of the book, but I just loved the story. And I felt like, there's enough grimness in our lives with this virus thing. I want to just offer something to readers that might put a smile on their face. So did that. So the book is available in print, ebook, audiobook. I read the book in the audiobook, and all that through Amazon, iTunes, Audible, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.